The pointing finger is the thing everyone on that set remembered later because of how long it hung there in the air with no answer coming back. The young fighter stood in the middle of the rehearsal floor, arm fully extended, finger aimed across the taped-out space at the quiet man in the black jacket, and he had just told him, loud enough for 40 people to hear, to come and show them all this famous speed everyone kept talking about. And behind him the enormous man in the wrestling singlet, the biggest human being anyone in that warehouse had ever stood next to, tipped his head back and laughed, a huge rolling laugh that filled the whole space. The quiet man did not move and did not speak, and the longer he stayed silent, the more the young fighter smiled, because he was reading the silence as the one thing it was not. To understand how a rehearsal turned into that, you have to understand the young man doing the pointing, because he was not a clown, and the story is worse for him if you imagine one. He was genuinely gifted, and that was the root of the whole thing. He was young, beautiful, explosively athletic, a European who had come up the hard way through full-contact competition, sleeping in gyms, working doors, doing whatever it took to get to Hollywood, and who could do things with his legs that almost no one else in the business could do. Head-height kicks from a standing start, spinning kicks that came around so fast the camera could barely hold them, splits that let him fire from angles that looked impossible. He had clawed his way here on the strength of that body, and he had every reason to believe in himself, because everything he could do, he could really do. The problem was not that his talent was fake. The problem was what he had decided his talent meant. Stay with this, because it is the quiet engine of the whole afternoon. He had spent 2 full days on that set, listening to the crew talk about somebody else. They could not stop. The stuntmen talked about the small man in the black jacket between every setup, the way film crews talk about the one performer who has become a kind of religion to them. How fast his hands were, how nobody had ever really touched him. How the stories, all the impossible stories, were, if anything, undersold. The small man was there because the production had brought him in to look at the fight choreography, to make the staged violence read as real, and the crew treated his presence like a visitation. And the young fighter, who was proud and gifted and used to being the most electric body in any room he walked into, listened to 2 days of it and felt something curdle. Because every word of praise for the small man landed on him as the same quiet sentence, "You are not the one they are talking about." He decided to do something about it, in front of everyone. It happened during a break, the cameras cold, the crew loose and scattered around the edges of the rehearsal space drinking coffee. The young fighter walked out into the middle of the taped floor and began to work, and it was, honestly, magnificent. He threw a spinning back kick that whipped around like a door in a gale. He fired a head-height roundhouse and held the leg up there at the top a full second, showing the room the flexibility. He dropped into a split and sprang back up into a jumping kick that cracked the air. The crew watched, and some of them clapped because it genuinely deserved it. And when he finished, breathing hard and satisfied, he turned and found the small man in the black jacket standing quietly at the edge, watching with polite, unreadable attention, and something about that calm, unimpressed attention set him off. He pointed. "You," he said, "everybody here won't shut up about how fast you are, so come show me. Try it on a man who isn't paid to fall down for the camera." That was when the giant laughed. He was there for the production too, a mountain of a man who found the whole thing enormously funny, not cruel, just delighted, the way huge, good-natured men sometimes are by conflict that cannot possibly touch them. His laugh rolled across the warehouse, and it did the cruelest thing a laugh can do, which was to make it a public event. Now it was not one proud young man and one quiet older one. It was 40 people and a laughing giant, all of them suddenly watching, and the small man standing alone inside all that attention with a finger pointed at his chest. And here is the first thing worth staying for, because it is the thing the young fighter completely misread. The small man did not answer. He did not bristle, did not smile tightly, did not step forward. He looked at the young fighter for a moment, and then he looked, unhurried, at the laughing giant, and then back, and he simply let the silence sit there. To the small man, this was not a fight worth having. To the young fighter, it was something else entirely. It was fear. It had to be fear. Why else would a man stand there and take this and say nothing? So he pushed it further, which is the mistake the whole story turns on. He turned his back on the small man, turned his back the way you do to something you have finished with, and spread his hands to the watching crew and grinned and said, "See, that's what I thought." And a few people laughed uneasily, and the giant chuckled again, and for one moment the young fighter owned the room, and it was the last moment he would own anything that afternoon. Because the small man, quietly, from the edge of the floor, finally spoke, and stay with this, because he did not raise his voice at all. "You have beautiful technique," he said. "Truly. May I show you one thing about it?" And he stepped onto the taped floor, unhurried, still calm, and the room went very quiet, and the giant stopped chuckling, because even he could feel the temperature change. The young fighter could not believe his luck. The famous man had finally foolishly agreed to play, and here is the part worth staying for, because he chose of all the things he could have thrown, the one that would cost him the most. He set himself and decided to end it, the way he always ended things, with the technique that had never failed to impress. A high spinning kick, his signature, the reverse turn with everything behind it, aimed to stop an inch from the small man's head and prove in front of everyone that his weapon could reach a legend before the legend could blink. What happened next took about 2 seconds, and the stunt crew argued about the pieces of it for years afterward, though they agreed on the shape. The kick was fast. It was genuinely world-class fast. But here is the thing about a high-spinning kick, the thing the young fighter had never had to learn because no one had ever made him pay for it. For the half-second it is in the air, the man throwing it is committed completely. He is turned away, blind through the spin, his whole weight poured into one leg that is no longer under him, sailing along a path he chose before he could see where it was going. It is the most beautiful thing in the martial arts, and the most helpless. And the small man had read it being born, had seen the drop of the shoulder, the turn of the hip, the tell that lives a heartbeat before the leg ever moves, and he did not block it, and he did not retreat from it, and he did not try to outmuscle it. He simply was not there when it arrived. One small step, offline, inside the arc, into the exact blind space the spin had opened, so that the young fighter's magnificent kick whipped through the air where a head had been and found nothing. A grip near the coffee table set his cup down without looking at it. Somebody breathed out a word. And in that instant, the young fighter, blind, airborne, committed, his back half turned and his weight nowhere, the small man's open hand arrived, light as a tap, and rested against the back of his neck. That was all. No strike, just contact. Just a palm laid gently on the one place a man in that position cannot protect, held there for the length of a breath, long enough for every single person watching to understand what it meant. In a real fight, the hand said, "You would already be finished, and you never even saw me move." Then the small man took the hand away and stepped back, and the young fighter came down out of his spin onto badly placed feet, stumbling, catching himself, spinning around wide-eyed to find the man who had been directly in front of him, now standing calmly behind him, hands already returned to his sides. The warehouse was dead silent, and the loudest silence in it belonged to the giant, because the giant had stopped laughing. That was the moment the whole room turned, and everyone in it felt the turn. The young fighter stood there with his chest heaving, not from exertion, but from the effort of understanding what had just happened to him, and it was written all over his face that he did not fully understand it yet, only that the fastest, most spectacular weapon he owned had been made to look like a door swinging open on an empty room, effortlessly, by a man who had not even closed his hand. He looked at the small man. He looked at the crew, who a minute ago had been laughing with him and were now staring at him with something closer to pity, and he looked last at the giant. The giant was not laughing. The giant was watching the small man now with an expression of complete, sober attention, the look of a man who has just seen something reorganize itself in front of him, and slowly the enormous head moved, a small nod given to the small man, one professional acknowledging another across a warehouse floor. It was worth more than any applause, and everyone saw it, and the young fighter saw it most of all. Here is the part that decided how the story would be told afterward. And stay with this, because the small man did the opposite of what the moment allowed him to do. He had every right to leave the young man standing there in the wreckage of his own arrogance. He did not. He stepped in, close, and he said something quiet, meant only for the two of them, that one stunt coordinator standing near enough swore he caught and repeated for years. He said, "Your kick is faster than mine. I only had to be somewhere your kick could not follow. That is not a gift you are born with. It is only years. You have the body. Now go and learn the patience, and you will be very dangerous." And then louder, so the room could hear it, and the young man's pride could survive the afternoon. Beautiful technique. The best spinning kick I have seen in a long time. It was a mercy, and it was a deliberate one, and it landed harder than any humiliation could have, because the young fighter had come out onto that floor to take something from the small man in front of everyone, and instead the small man had handed him something in front of everyone. And there is no answer to that. The pride went out of him, and something quieter and better came into his face, and after a moment he did the only thing left that was worth doing. He nodded, and he said low, "Thank you," and he meant it. "I ran a camera on that shoot," the stunt coordinator would say, years later, whenever somebody asked. 30 years in the business, I have seen every tough guy who ever walked onto a set decide to test somebody. It always ends the same ugly way. This was the only time I ever saw it end with the tough guy better off than he started. He came at that man to take his legend down a peg, and he walked away carrying a piece of it. The young fighter went on to a real career. He got fast, and then he got patient, and the people who trained with him in later years said there was a story he told when a cocky student needed hearing it, about the day he pointed at a small, quiet man on a rehearsal floor. Sure, he was about to expose a myth, and got taught in 2 seconds, and without a single blow, the difference between being fast and being finished. He never told it as a defeat. He told it as the day his real education began. And the giant, who had laughed first and loudest, told it too in his own way, for the rest of his life. He would shake his enormous head and say that he had walked into that warehouse thinking he was about to watch a movie star get embarrassed, and had walked out having watched a man defeat the fastest legs in the building, with nothing but a step and an open hand, and never even raise his voice. The laugh, he'd say, was the biggest mistake he made that day, because he had laughed at exactly the wrong man, and he had the good sense, unlike some, to know it before the afternoon was over,